Hi, this is Kevin Bonham, and this is the 6th video in Inkscape for Scientists. In this video, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of actually building scientific figures in Inkscape. So this is obviously something that a lot of scientists need to do. We need to sort of arrange different plots into scientific figures. You might include a cartoon as a schematic when you're going to build a poster or a paper. And so we're going to get into some tools that will help with that. So let's get started. And you may notice over here in the left-hand side, I've got this new little overlay that's going to sort of show what I'm doing. That's a left click, that's a right click, and it'll show key presses and stuff. So hopefully that's helpful as we go forward. Let me know in comments if it's distracting or if it's causing problems. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to import a figure from another software. So these days I use code plotting software to build most of my scientific figures. And actually, I do a lot in the code itself. So I'm not doing as much manipulation in Inkscape typically. So here's an example of that. You'll notice here the figure type is that I'm looking for here is SVG. So when you import, when you export files from other software, plotting software, whether that's Prism or it's code using like the R programming language, you want to export your figures as scalable vector graphics or SVG. Ideally, you can also do PDFs. You don't want to do a rasterized file type like a JPEG or a PNG because those files, the underlying objects are not actually manipulable. Those are just pixels that are arranged in a certain order, and we can't manipulate the underlying object. So if you have an SVG like this one, you can import it. What you'll see here when you import an SVG is you have a couple of different options here. These dictate basically how this SVG is going to become incorporated into the SVG we're actually editing in Inkscape. So up here we have include SVG image as editable objects. This is the one I typically use. You can add it as a new page in your current file. You can embed it. So this can be interesting if you have a couple of different components. You want to import them, and then you can edit the underlying file object separately, and they will update in this. But that can get confusing, I think, sometimes. So I'm just going to include the SVG image as an editable object. And here it is. You'll see this was generated from my plotting software. What you'll notice, so this seems like one object, but if you look over here in the layers panel, this is actually a group that is composed of a lot of paths and other groups here that compose this underlying object. So if I double click here, what you'll see first of all is that this background is just a rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And then here, again, I've got rectangles that are underlying these individual objects. Each of these curves on this plot are individual dotted lines that are themselves objects and lines with individual points that can all be manipulated separately. So here I'm using the node selection tool to mess with that. Generally speaking, best practices, you wouldn't manipulate data this way. So I'm not going to take a handful of these circles and say, oh, I'm just going to move them. Oops, let's use selection tool here. Forgetting my keyboard shortcuts now, but I'm not going to move these dots over here, right? You don't want to manipulate underlying objects in Inkscape. So when you've imported this, what you can manipulate is the plot objects themselves. So what I like to do is I like to manipulate the individual plots by themselves. Of course, you could include the Y and X labels here if you wanted, but I like to sometimes manipulate those separately. So here I'm going to select a set of objects, and then I'm going to use the group button over here, or Control G, so that now I have this object, and you can see over here in the layers panel, this is now a group that contains all of those underlying paths, but I can keep this now together and manipulate individual components if I need to. But this way, I can do a little bit more fine editing. What you'll also notice here, I'm going to double click out here. This whole set of plots is still under this parent group here. So one thing you may want to do is you may want to undo one level of ungrouping. Control Shift G or ungroup. So if I do this one layer of ungrouping, now I can manipulate individual plots without worrying about the group as a whole. So again, Control G. Oops, I included the x-axis there. Sometimes it can slow down. There's a lot of individual objects here. So actually, while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these plots just so we have less. Each of these individual bars here is a separate object that Inkscape is trying to deal with. So sometimes if you pull in, pre-constructed figures that have a lot of individual elements, Inkscape can have some issues with that. All right, so I'm gonna select all of these. Whoops, there we go again. You can see there all of those individual components. I'm just gonna go ahead and delete them. There are settings that you can manipulate that I won't go into here that can improve the performance a little bit. But now, hopefully with all of those elements removed, we can sort of focus just on these objects here. So again, I'm going to group this plot here without the individual labels. And I'm going to group that. Okay, so this goes with this. These go here. Oops. See, this is not actually a set of text. We're going to group the text together as well. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just import one more figure from another project. They don't actually go together, but just so you can see what that looks like. So here I'm going to say File, Import. I'm going to use the button over here if you prefer. And here I'm going to do some growth rates file. And here, instead of including as an editable object, I'm going to say link or embed the SVG, link the SVG file in an image tag. So when I do that, what you'll notice is this comes in as an image, and it's not actually editable. I can't double click this object and manipulate it. But what I can do now, if I come over here and I say open, and I open this file separately in Inkscape. So now I have two Inkscape windows. I'm going to zoom into this one for a sec. Now if I manipulate this file, I'll remove the background and I'll just remove the legend and these, let's remove the background here, and I want to select these guys here. So I'm going to delete these background lines here that aren't necessary. And now what you'll see, if I save this image here and I come back to this place where I've embedded it, now this object has updated from that background image. So this can be a useful way, again, if you're building sort of complex diagrams and you want your edits in one space to propagate to your other figures, this can be a nice way to do that. So that's some information on how to import files from other software into Inkscape. You saw the embedding versus bringing it in as an editable object. In the next video, we're going to talk about now manipulating these figures, putting them into a different organization using alignment and a couple of other useful features. So I'll see you in the next one.